Hi everybody, Abby here again from the Red Velvet Group. Today's topic, I would say, is a little tricky, a little controversial. There's definitely arguments on both sides of it. Today we wanted to talk about assessment. How do we assess and make sure that the students are actually learning something? The current structure right now, I would say, is standardized testing. And in my opinion, I think it's a little outdated and a little ineffective, honestly. But again, there are always two sides to the story, so there are many arguments for it. And I can see both sides. I might not agree with it, but I can definitely see both sides. So the biggest thing is standards. There is a consistency across all the people that are taking the test. The test is this, the correct answer is this. If you get it right, it's right. If you get it wrong, it's wrong. And standards are important. The next point is teacher evaluation. So a lot of times teachers evaluations about how well they're doing and things like that are actually tied to standardized testing. So if the teacher is effective or not is determined based on how well their students do on the tests. Again, standards. And then testing for college readiness. So colleges say that a student needs to know this, this, and this by the time that they're ready to graduate and move on to college, and it makes sense. Again, it's standards, but I don't really like those. Um, we'll talk about that in a minute, sorry. I do think that standards are important, just not in these contexts, in my opinion. There are a lot of issues, and I definitely agree with a lot of these. When a test says if you're going to keep your job or not, you're going to teach to the test. And that's not a really good way for students to learn things. So a lot of times teachers are having to teach to the test and not about other things, not actually giving somebody like the whole view of a topic or actually being able to like delve into a topic. I'll include a little comic in the section below, but it's one of my favorites. It's a student asking a question, and the teacher says that they're not going to answer it, or it was a good question, but it's not going to be on the test, so they're not going to answer it. I think that that's an accurate description sometimes of the American classroom. Multiple choice. Multiple choice usually seems super duper great because there's a right and a wrong answer. But what if I read it differently than you? What if, in my head, this part's emphasized so it makes more sense that this is the right answer? There's too much interpretation. I know that really they try not to make it up for interpretation, but it happens. And if you are somebody who doesn't have any contextual background to relate to that question, it might be even more confusing and not really help you. Even if it's like a math question and they're asking about farm animals, if you have never been around or interacted with farm animals, it sounds kind of weird, but if you haven't had that contextual experience, it might throw you off, or it might not make as much sense because you don't know. Stress. Stress is another really big one in my opinion. Somebody's future, essentially, is based on this test. I don't think that amount of pressure is appropriate for a student, because the student has the future of themselves on the line a lot of times with the standardized tests, but also the teachers, honestly, because if the students don't do well, then it reflects poorly on the teacher, which then could affect their job. But then it also reflects bad on the school because the school's testing scores would go down. So the tests are just very, very stressful. And I don't think that that's really a conducive learning environment. Some people just aren't very good at tests. Um, it's just not a skill in their belt. And I don't think it's fair to grade them on that. They just don't take tests very well. If you sit down with them and talk to them about all the subject matter, they've got it. They have all that information there. It's just when they sit down to take a test, it doesn't come out right. And the last thing I wanted to say about that would be, why does it have to be so high stakes? Why does everything have to depend on these standardized tests? I don't really, I got the pros for it. We talked about that. But I just don't see the high stakes-ness of it. For assessment in the future, I see it more along the lines of standards-based grading and project-based atmospheres learning. Instead of tons of tests and teaching to the tests, the students are out in the world experiencing it. And experiencing the things that will be beneficial to them in the future. The teacher would have to put in the work at the beginning to make the rubrics in the standards for each project that they're going to be working on throughout the year and the goals of the class, instead of random letters that don't really have a meaning. The students would be evaluated on how they're meeting the standards for the project, which it kind of sounds like standardized tests, but this is specific to the classroom. So the teacher makes up the standards before, and this is how we're going forth with them. It's not something over the whole country that doesn't always work for the schools that it dictates. With this, it's classroom-based, and the teacher can tailor it to the students' needs. So if one project they were kind of weak here, they can really focus on that for the next project or something along those lines. I think it's a fantastic way to grade, as the student knows where they stand in relation to the learning goals of the project, and they experience what the real world looks like. For example, I'm evaluated based on standards for my organization. If I am meeting the standards, I am a succeeding performer. If I'm not meeting the standards, I would be a low performer. If I'm exceeding the standards, I would be a high performer. This is what the real world looks like. It's based on standards, and are you meeting those standards? Not, you did this, you get an A. What does an A actually mean? So I think standards work very well, would work. Some schools do it, some schools don't. I think it would work very well in schools because it's really a reflection of real life. Last note I wanted to make, since in my world there would be no standardized tests, people might freak out about what that means for the future of college admissions and such. In my mind, all the schools would change over to the standard-based grading, so it would be similar to how we work grade-wise, just standards instead of letters. So, I will admit that I have not completely mastered the idea of how this would transition from the elementary, high school standards to college, but I think that that would be a much better way for students to be evaluated because they know what's going on, and it really does relate to how it'll work later on in the workplace. In summary, my Magic School Bus's assessment would be standards-based grading and project-based learning. There would not be any standardized testing, and teachers would set up the frame, the rubric, for the standards and main ideas for the projects, and then the learning would just kind of develop from there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my video.